I'm Ron Kirsop. I'm going to kick us off today, and then I'll hand it over to Melissa in a little bit. I am the executive director of the OWL library system, formerly Pioneer Library System, and I have a handful of experience with various types of grant writing. But what I'm most interested in is primarily project management and making sure that all the information that is needed to complete a project, whether it's a grant-related project or otherwise, is all put together in a easy to find location. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, and I put together a simple little spreadsheet that I'm going to share out with Christy and Tina after the workshop, and you're welcome to use it in Google Drive, download it and use it as a spreadsheet, create your own, or however you want to do it. But I'm going to walk through this quickly, and then, like I said, I'll hand it over to Melissa. So this, I'm just calling this the grant writing toolkit for this year. And what it is it's a tool that you can use to put all of your organization information into one location. So once that grant pops up that you want to apply for, whether you're planning for it or not, you can just pull this document up, copy paste everything from your spreadsheet to whatever grant it is that you're trying to fill out. So this is pretty simple. I didn't put a ton of information in here because my expectation is that you'll be able to use this, start it simple, and then as you find more information, as you go through your grant writing journeys, you may want to add some other stuff in here. So the basic information that I have, obviously legal entity name, you want to have that, what year it was founded, your website, all that stuff. Also, there is a lot of organizations or a lot of similar entities that are going through a name change process like I am right now, which means you may have a DBA set up, which is a doing business as name. So if your organization is going through a name change or may change in the future, you want to track your DBAs that you have. Some doing business as names last for a while. Others you have a set closeout time. But if you have one, you will want to make sure that you have it. If you don't, you can take these fields and you can go ahead and delete the row if you want. If there's information within here that's not helpful for you, don't worry about it. Your EIN, which is your employment identification number, that's going to be really important for a lot of grants that you're going to fill out. So you're going to want to make sure that you have that. Your SAM information. So I work a lot with the New York State Construction Aid Program, which is a grant program or an aid program that goes through New York State. And one of the big things that they need is your system of award management information. And unlike other DUNS numbers or EINs or anything, this is a registration that just gives you a expiration date for it. So if you have a sam.gov, making sure it's there, your DUNS number, any other type of tax exempt information, all your incorporation documents, things like that. So this, when you're adding information here, you may have a direct link, which is really helpful. That's great. You may have all of your incorporation documents scattered all over the place. If you're a public library, most of your documents should be on your website for minimum standards. If you're a different type of entity, a different type of library, you may have set locations for all of this stuff. So listing out where these exist, like in the notes, so I have in charter file here, and maybe the incorporation documents, I have a bunch of sub items that are here. So maybe my charter, my bylaws, maybe my New York State determination letter, my letter from the IRS, things like that are usually going to be really handy to know exactly where they are. So putting them in the location is going to be helpful. Knowing your annual operating budget. There are quite a few grants that will ask for 3 to 5 years of past audit history for your organization. So knowing where those are located and how to get them relatively quickly. Those may not all be on your website where you can click to them, but one thing that I like to do, so everybody is probably familiar with like the Windows Explorer thing here. I like to just grab the path up here. So if this is the folder that all my annual audit information was, I would just copy this and then put it in my my spreadsheet right here, and then I know this is where it lives on my computer. So anywhere where you hide these documents, because they have a tendency to get lost every once in a while, just make sure that they're in a collective location, and then this document can point to where that is. Same with 990. If you're a nonprofit, you file a 990 every year. Any type of financial statements that you have may be important. Again, if you're a public library, which is primarily my experience, your budget will need to be online. So having your direct link to that will be easy. So when you're filling out a grant and it asks for this year's fiscal information or maybe previous year's fiscal information, you can grab it real quick from that link without a problem. Also, a lot of times on grants, it's going to ask for a key staff member. Having all that information listed here is going to be helpful. You can add as many key staff as you want. So here I just have key staff 1, but maybe I would have myself and then maybe my program director and maybe my finance director all within this document, so I can just grab them real quick and put them right into that grant as I'm filling it out and working on it. Signing authority is going to be important too, especially for those new directors out there. If you don't know who is authorized to sign off on certain things, whether it's checks or to sign into binding agreements with a funding authority, make sure you know who that is. At my organization, it's the executive director, our board president, and then our treasurer. So having those people listed out in here is going to be helpful, so you know who's going to be able to sign in any type of agreement that you're going to be working on. Board president, board secretary. I don't know how many things I've had to have notarized with the board president signing off on it and then the board secretary signing off on it too. So listing out their information here. As we're going through this, you'll notice that some of this stuff may go out of date from year to year. So you're going to want to keep this up to date as you're progressing. So every year, if you take 15, 20 minutes to make sure that all the information is still accurate and correct, then you can just pull it out whenever you need it. Building stuff, because a lot of grants have to do with building information. So you're going to want to know what year it was built, your square footage. Owned or leased. If you own your building, fantastic. It's good to have the information. If you are in a building that you have some type of lease agreement for, if you are going to be using money for any type of furniture purchase or construction purchasing or equipment purchasing, oftentimes they'll want to know what the status is on whether your building is going to be occupied by you for any length of time. So being able to prove with that lease is important. So if you don't know, you'll want to look at that. Moving on, service area. So you're going to want to know your population, your geographic location, and any general demographic information. So I did a quick link to the Census Bureau here for Ontario County. There's a good deal of grant information where you have to think about the poverty level or the percentage of kids in high schools that receive free and reduced lunch, the graduation rates. There's all kinds of different demographic info that can be helpful. So as you find that, just linking those out so it's here, so it's real quick, you just grab it from the census website, or if you find the quick facts page, or if you find somewhere else that's going to be important, you want to make sure that that's all there. And then that just means you're going to be able to process this information a bit faster. I have a link down here. You'll want to know where your charter is, any strategic plan you have. Grants love to see mission statements, vision statements, core values, things like that. So if you have a single document with all that information in it, just link it right here so you can grab it real quick. You can also just put it in the notes so you can copy and paste relatively quickly. Feel free, like I said, to add different lines. There's probably going to be a ton of information that you're thinking of, like, oh, Ron didn't include this thing. Especially if you're a different entity type than a public library. I am sure that school libraries, academic institutions, medical libraries, they all have a different subset of critical documents that they're probably going to need once you move forward with any type of grant writing. If you look down at the bottom here, so this is all your key information, but another tip that I'll give you is I really like it when I know all the stuff that's coming up. So I'll know that I'm going to apply for this grant, I'm going to get funding from this agency, but sometimes there are just surprise grants that pop up that I wasn't necessarily ready for and I didn't necessarily prepare for. And it's always good to have a project or several in your back pocket that you are able to apply for certain types of funding. For example, this year we were contacted by one of our assembly offices, and they said, hey, I have $25,000 that I would like to give to your libraries, but I need to know the details by tonight. That's a very fast turnaround time. Luckily, we had a few project ideas that we've been toying around with that we could very quickly hand off and give to this individual. So that's going to be a nice helpful thing, and which is why I put this grant project 1 here. You can duplicate these as many times as you want. So you can have, you can make that grant project 2, grant project 3, you can just keep going down here at the bottom and filling this out. And what this is, it's just a light way for you to put together kind of a general project overview of things that you're interested in doing that could potentially be grant eligible at some point. Maybe you're not ready to do them right now, but you're going to be able to at least have the general information together. So for this one, you just need a project title, why you're doing this project, so some form of purchase, some form of purpose statement, some key deliverables that you're working through, who's going to be managing it, who your project partners are. If you have, if you're working on specific projects with people, or you're going to write a grant together, having letters of support from those stakeholders or those partner groups are really good. And then you can even add those to a section on here too, so you know where they are. What's the total estimated cost? Because we always need to know that. When you want to start it, when it's going to end, and then have some narrative. So what's the scope of the project? How is it going to benefit the organization? You can talk a bit about the budget, because usually you have to give at least a few sentence explanation on why you want this project funding, or why it funded, or why it deserves that funding. Timeline narrative, so to make sure that you are able to put this in place within the scope of whatever the grant cycle is, but also at the same time, put this in there because if you have a project idea, realistically, we're not going to be able to do this in 2022, even if we did get money for it. So be honest with yourself here. Sometimes you just have to let a grant go and you may not be able to apply for it. Be realistic with what you're actually able to do. Any types of partners you're working on, a sustainability plan. So after those grant funds are gone, how is this going to continue? Is it a one-off project where you're going to create something and then that's it? Or is it a new service initiative that you're going to have to figure out how to fund long-term? Make sure you think about that before you get into the actual application piece of it, because you're going to want to know how that's going to change over time. And then having some form of assessment. Melissa may talk about this a little bit later, but how will your project be assessed or evaluated? Typically, you need to add that type of information within your grant. So having kind of a brief statement of this is what we're going to do, and then including any notes here. So using this, having all your organizational information here, and then some potential projects that you're looking for funding with a little bit of an overview here, doesn't take that long to fill it out and get all this together, but it's going to save you a lot of time in the long run once that grant pops up and you actually have to start filling stuff out. So that's what I have for you with the toolkit itself, as well as some of the projects. Again, I'm going to have this available for you that you can use, and you can customize it any way that you'd like. But now I would like to turn it over to Melissa Jadlos, so she can talk a bit about some other areas of grant writing. Take it away, Melissa.
Thank you, Ron. Am I muted or good? Okay, I'm good, I think. All right, so that was really helpful. I can certainly see how it would be helpful for me to have all of that information together in one place to be able to put into the application. You might even want to add something like a boilerplate description of your organization that you can just grab and pop in. So what I'm going to be talking about, introducing myself. I'm Melissa Jadlos. I'm the library director at St. John Fisher College. And I'm here because we have written some successful grants, local and regional grants, but I think also I have a unique perspective because I have been a grant reader and reviewer for several years. So I'm going to bring my experience from, seeing all of these grants and, tips and tricks to improve them to make sure that you have the best chance possible for being successful in your grant application. Okay, so first, prepare. Pull all of your information together and, fill out your spreadsheet so you've got everything together. First, do you qualify? Some grants are very specific about who can apply for these grants and what these monies can be used for. So be very, very careful that you meet all of the qualifications for the grant. There's a wonderful statewide program, the Documentary Heritage and Preservation Services of New York, and they have like grants for government agencies and grants for nonprofit agencies, and sometimes they intersect and sometimes they don't. So you just have to be very careful and make sure that you qualify for the grant you're applying for. Go to the grants website, look for sample successful grants. Often an organization will say, they'll put out a press release. These organizations received this much money in our grant cycle last year. And you can look at that and you can see, oh, I know somebody at that organization, or that's something similar that I want to do. And you can contact those people and say, hey, congratulations, I saw you got a grant. Can you, give me any advice for writing my grant application? I've never had anybody turn me down for that. They might say, I'm busy right now, talk to me next week. But it can be very helpful to hear how other people are processing and submitting grants that are successful. Read the FAQs. They're there for a reason because everybody asks the same questions, and you can get a lot of good information, things that you might not have thought about. Pad your timeline. So often there are things that you have to do in order to qualify to apply for the grant, and hoops that you have to jump through after you have written the grant and before you submit it. So for example, I know that if you're applying for a Rochester Regional Library Council grant, you have to have a phone call with Ryan to make sure that you qualify. So make sure you allow time for that phone call and take that opportunity to ask as many questions as you can. Grant people are great resources, and they really want to give away their money, and they really want these ideas to be funded. So they want you to succeed. So use them as a resource, and bounce ideas off them, and they'll let you know if what you're asking isn't appropriate, or they can't give you that kind of advice, but they will always tell you and give you as much help as they can. And then also there may be hoops that you have to jump through before you can submit the grant. So for example, I'm on a college campus. I have to work with our college grants office, and any grant proposal has to have the president's signature before it can go out. So that isn't always going to be turned around in an hour. So I have to allow a couple of days for that to happen at the end. So make sure you have enough time before you have to submit that grant to do those extra steps. So these are the things that I'm going to go over today. Follow the directions, do not leave anything blank, use the application as your template. I'll talk a little bit about sustainability and assessment, and little tips for how you can tell us that you're going to be able to succeed with this project. Okay, so these are mostly self-explanatory. Follow the directions. It sounds simple, but it's really important because most grant reviewers, we're following a score sheet or a rubric. And if the directions say, acknowledge that you will write a mid-year and end-of-year report, and you don't have a sentence in your narrative that says, I acknowledge that I will write a mid-year and end-of-year report, we can't add points for that. And so that may be 1 or 2 points on the score sheet or the rubric that you just lose because you didn't dot all of your I's and cross all of your T's. So just make sure you're following every step of the directions. And also do not leave anything blank. If you think that there's a section that you don't have anything to put in, that's a red flag, and you should ask questions about that, because I I would say 99% of the time you have to have something in there. And, you know, if you consult with the grant office and they say, oh yeah, you're right, you don't have to put anything in there, then you put in there, I consulted with the grant office and I'm leaving this blank on purpose, just so that we know that nothing is missing. So this is the thing I see blank most often. It's the dreaded blank budget. And often the part that is blank is the personnel in-kind salaries line. So in-kind salaries means the contribution that you or your staff are making towards accomplishing this project, and the salary reflected in the time that you are putting into this project. So for example, I'll see a blank personnel in-kind salary spreadsheet, but in the budget narrative or in the project narrative, there will be sentences like, project coordinator will create metadata. Staff will box original materials and ship to the network. So activities that people are doing that take up time, all of those can be calculated and included as the in-kind salaries. So you just, you know, how long is it going to take to box up the stuff? 15 minutes, 5 hours, practice filling a box. Calculate the person's salary who's going to be doing that and add it into your in-kind budget. So anything that you can do shows that you are participating. And even if you think that you're shipping something out and everything's going to be done by a consultant or an outside entity, I guarantee you there is still stuff that your staff will be doing. So make sure that you include all of the things that you are contributing to the project in that budget statement. So this is a really great trick that one of my librarians taught me, and it's using the application as a template. So this is the narrative from a Northern New York Library Network grant application, and it's telling you for the narrative section, it should be 500 to 1,000 words, and all of the things that should be included in this section. So what I do is I take it and I pop it into a Word document. And I'm seeing questions in the chat, and I'm going to answer them at the end. I hope that's okay. So I take these things and I put them in a Word document, and then I separate them out by paragraphs. That way I know that I won't miss anything. So you kind of want to bullet point things out for sentence by sentence to make sure that you've touched every point of the information that they're asking. Now, the words that I have in green here are some great things to include in your sentences. So if you're providing an overview of the project and how it will improve or change something, you want to use the in order to statement. So this project of digitizing this organization's records in order to make them available to everyone 24/7 around the world. Then identify the project's audiences and relate the material to that audience. So people around the world will be able to do genealogical research for their ancestors because this information is out. Then describe anticipated outputs and what the impact should be as a result of seeing this information online. People are, this, that, and that will happen. And then you always want to align what your project is with your organization's mission and strategic plan. So I checked Ron's spreadsheet, and it has a section in there for your mission statement. So you should have it right there in front of you, and you can just relate right to it. So in my hypothetical example here, it's part of the mission of this XYZ library to share unique materials with people around the world. So your narrative then might say, we want to digitize the organization's records in order to make them available to people 24/7 around the world. They will be able to do genealogical research on their own and gain a better understanding of what their ancestors were up to. As a result, It will increase the visibility of our collection. It will, improve patrons' ability to understand where they're coming from, and it will support our mission to share unique materials with people around the world. So those are some great phrases that you can use in your narrative. So next is sustainability. So as Ron mentioned in his section, you want to explain how this project will be carried on over time. So absolutely, sometimes this is a one and done grant project and it's over, and you're going to use the money and the project is finished. But more often it's something that will continue. So you have to explain in your grant, you have to explain how it's going to continue. Now, almost all grants do not allow for employees to be hired to replace full-time staff. So this is something I see pretty often, where people want to kind of hire employees. So on the left-hand side, we want to hire a temporary employee to prepare our archives for our 75th anniversary in 2023. That's a one and done. We're going to hire somebody, they're going to do it, a project, the celebration is going to happen. We take down all the streamers and confetti, and it's over, and that part-time person is finished. But then, somebody else has said, we want to hire a temporary employee to assist with outreach and story time. But that doesn't end, that keeps going on. So there's no way that you're going to be able to continue library and outreach after this time period. So that would not be something that would qualify as a grant funded initiative. Here's an example of sustainability with projects. So on the left, we want to create a makerspace. While our technology budget is not big enough to buy all of the equipment, after the grant period is over, we have enough money in our technology budget to pay for supplies. So that is a great sustainability statement. We're going to get this equipment and we're going to be able to keep it going in years 2, 3, and 4 because we will be able to pay for supplies. Something that I see often that is not a good example of sustainability is we want to subscribe to this software that's going to do XYZ. Well, how are you going to pay for the software in the next fiscal year? You get people used to being able to do oral histories with this special software in your library. Are you only going to offer it 1 year? What are you going to do in year 2? Or we want to create a traveling robotics kit. That's great. But what happens if the kit comes back and things are broken or missing? How are you going to replace that? Are you, and in order to keep it going, do you include a special part of your budget for breakage? And then what are you going to be doing, down the line? How are you going to continue that in the next few years? Okay, assessment. This is one of my favorite words, and I know a lot of people it's not a favorite word of theirs, but it's something I really enjoy doing. So assessment is, what is our current state and what do you hope the impact of the project will be? And then how will you measure that impact? So I was talking a little bit about an organization's records. So in this particular project, this organization gets 10 requests a week regarding this collection, and they're spending 3.5 hours a week answering these genealogy questions. But by digitizing the collection, they want to reduce staff time. So so the impact of the project will be, we hope the impact that staff time will be reduced. So we will keep statistics on site access and staff referrals to the site in order to document the change. So the hope is that those 10 requests can be answered by a boilerplate email referring someone to the online collection, and the staff, that takes a minute to do, and so that should reduce the staff time. So by keeping track of the referrals and the number of times that the site is accessed, then you can measure the impact and the change that is had on staff time and increasing the accessibility to other places. So here's another example of assessment. So frequently I see people putting forth a project and they have either way overestimated or way underestimated the amount of time it's going to take to do something. So it's really important that if you are going to do a digitization project, or you're going to create metadata, or anything where you have to physically do something, time it, do a practice run, figure it out. How do we know that you're going to be able to do this? So you can say, in a practice run, we were able to digitize 10 photographs an hour. So with this project fully funded, we should be able to digitize 100% of the collection. We will keep statistics on the numbers scanned each week to stay on track. So that says, this is our current state. We can do 10 an hour. We hope we're going to continue to do 10 an hour. We're going to make sure that we do 10 an hour. That way we can keep on track and have a very good use of the money that you're providing to us. So tell us you can succeed. Let us know that you're going to be able to handle this project. Tell us about successful projects that you've done. So you could say, we received a grant last year and we were able to fully complete the grant, and we were able to be successful in that project. And this is how it improved. Tell us that these are things that your patrons are really asking for. Patrons said 75% of our patrons said that they would attend a future event like this. Let us know that people are clamoring for this project, this grant, or whatever it is that you want to do, so that we know that this can be successful. That's just something additional to add that would help us know that you know what you're getting into, and that you believe that you can do it, and that you're going to be able to succeed. So here are some helpful links, and these will be available in the slides that are going to be presented to you with the recording. The documentary heritage program guidelines. So this is a PDF document that gives directions for how to apply for a documentary heritage program grant. Excuse me. But they are great instructions for applying for any grant. They're detailed. They have a lot of good ideas and a lot of good information. The second one is, I suggested at the beginning to look for past award ideas and past recipients. This is a sample of how RRLC has set out that information. And then there's some examples on the National Endowment for the Humanities applications and some of the narratives about projects that they've done. So you can just get ideas and see some other things that are going on. So I think it's time for Q&A. How'd we do on time?
We did great. It only took us a half an hour to get through that stuff. So
wow.
Why don't, if Melissa, what we can do is the questions, I see a couple came in for through the chat, but if people want to drop things in the Q&A, I'd be happy to kind of grab those when they come up. But the first one, Melissa, is comes to us from, it looks like Catherine, and she says, I'm a little confused because if the person is already working at the institution and is being paid by the institution, not paid extra, how does that work with the in-kind salary?
That's great. That's a really good question. So they don't get any more money. You're just saying that you're contributing to this project, that I'm getting a little money, you're giving me some money, I'm giving some effort to this project as well, and they just put a monetary unit on it. Does that answer your question?
It answers it for me. We'll see if there we go. Okay, she says. Okay,
oh yes. Okay, good.
Perfect. And then Mary had put in there, do you include in-kind salary if it's not asked for?
Don't include anything that's not asked for. That's something that I talk to a lot of, like, as librarians, we want to answer questions and we want to provide information. So a lot of times, I'll say, you don't have to provide too much. Just answer the questions that are asked. If somebody wants more information, they will follow up and ask.
If anyone else has questions, drop them in the Q&A and we'll take care of them. But while we're letting people think about that, Melissa, I have a couple questions that I'll throw out there if you're okay with that.
Sure.
Yeah? Okay, so I've seen quite a few grant applications ask for like, we'll give you X amount of dollars, what match funds, or can you prove your match funds? And I've heard of organizations being reluctant to do that because they're afraid that if they show how much money they have, they might not get the grant. And I always
Mm.
looked at it as showing the match funds shows your commitment to the project, that you're willing to spend money. But I'd be interested in what your thoughts are in terms of match funds versus award funds and how people should feel about putting that in their applications.
I think that people definitely should put it in there because I agree. It is a sign that you are um, willing to commit your funds. And thinking back on my experience as a reader, looking at an organization's willingness to provide, you know, sweat equity or, money or anything is a commitment, is a good sign of commitment. And I see in the chat that Laura said she can comment on this too.
Yeah, Laura, jump in here. What do you got?
Sure. Yeah. I can just give you what my perspective as someone, my organization awards grants. Don't be afraid to include that. If you, like Ron said, if you're showing you have something to put on the table, if that demonstrates there's buy-in in your organization, it's not necessarily going to make someone want to give you less money. So we have a grant program we run where our members can work with a local agency to do capacity building services. And often we'll ask, do you have any grant funds? Do you have any funds available to put towards this grant project? And most of the time people do include something, but very rarely do we actually take them up on that. Often we will just fund the whole thing, but it helps us understand that the board is bought in or whoever the higher level agency is. So, don't be afraid of that.
And we do have some questions coming in Q&A, so I'll keep reading them out, Melissa, and then you and I can kind of tag team them as they come in. So the first one, do grants tend to not fund hiring employees for a new position?
That's correct. Grants, I've never seen a grant to hire someone for a permanent new position. You might often see in a job announcement, grant funded position, but those are almost always temporary for only the time period of the grant.
And that's a lot of times true for, there's a lot of grants that won't fund any type of operational service. Usually it's those project-based items, but if you have an operation that's already continuing going, there isn't an indefinite source of funding that's going to support that too, but good question. Our next one comes from Gina. How does in-kind estimates work for your quote unquote employees if they're volunteers?
I think what I would do in that situation is I would assign their time to a minimum wage, whatever minimum wage is in your area, but put an asterisk in there and say this will be done by a volunteer worker whose hours, equal X number in salary. Asterisks are great.
And I can answer this next one. So Rachel asks, I may have missed this, but as a librarian at a medical center, would I have to put something in the board president / board secretary section of the toolkit? We technically have a board, ellipses. You don't have to put anything in the that toolkit. The benefit of that is you can customize it any way that you want. So I come from a public library background, and most of the grants that we're applying for, we need to have the board information from the president and secretary, but maybe at your medical library, it would be somebody else who would need to be involved with those types of applications. So you could potentially put them in. If you don't need anyone, you can just delete those lines and then add on other relevant information that may be helpful to you. And Valerie says, we're going to get some matching funds, but we need to submit the grant before knowing the numbers. What would you suggest that we do? Interesting. Let's start that one, Melissa.
Well, I think I might include a statement from whomever you're getting the money from, documenting that that yes, you will be getting some money. Maybe can you find out a range up to X amount, or 25 or percentage, something like that. Anything that you could provide, whether it's we are going to provide something X% up to a certain amount, any kind of information. And if you can't get that from whoever's providing the money, just put a statement in, we've been promised. But anything you could do to back up that we have been promised, thing I think would be helpful. What do you think, Ron?
It kind of reminds me, I've seen this happen before with the, so NYSEG and NYSERDA will do, they'll give like a matching amount for some type of sustainable, like environmental sustainable project. And then you'll also be able to receive funding from another location. But one of those funding sources may say that we'll fund up to X amount of the total cost, but if you don't know the total cost or something like that. And what I've seen happen in the past is just to, even if you know that the funding's coming in, you do exactly what Melissa said, and you said it's in there. But if you can show that you're going to fund the project regardless, it'll probably make a stronger argument to your funding agency, just so they don't feel like they're funding a project that's contingent on this other money that you don't know about. So I would go with what you had said, Melissa. I think that's a good route to take. And then Christine asks, with NYSL construction grant funding, there is match with a state roof replacement facing us. I am searching for other funding sources. Advice? So with that one, for the construction aid program, I would probably start by writing your legislator a letter, because those are some of the people that can sometimes offer, at least have some type of money that they may be interested in funding. A roof's not like the most attractive thing, but sometimes they'll have money for that. Doing some, depending on your library type, you may be able to do a capital campaign. I will say that things like roofs, boilers, any type of potential replacement or maintenance, you'll probably want to put together, and this isn't going to help you right now, but for those that may be facing these situations in the future, you'll want to put together a facilities plan where you outline all this stuff, kind of like the how in the spreadsheet there I had different projects. If you have a facilities plan that says this is the year that we plan on this thing going, so you can use your capital reserve fund or whatever funds that you have to kind of plan on those types of projects, that'll be really helpful. There are, and Melissa, you may have mentioned this, but there are some funding sources that can't be matched with certain grants. So for the New York State construction aid program, like you can't use SAM money for it, which is usually legislative money. So that's another thing to look into when you have grants, is if you're receiving it from other locations, is it eligible to be match funds for the project you're working on? And in the case of construction aid, it wouldn't. But depending on your library type, you could potentially do capital campaign, talk to your legislators. Unfortunately for construction aid, there isn't too much out there, but you may be able to find some things. And we have one from Samantha. So for those of us who may not even know where to find grants we're qualified for, is there a resource or database you'd recommend using? What do you think, Melissa?
I think I find things, it can be based around the type of project that you want to do. So are you doing a preservation project? Are you doing a building project? So you can, if I'm doing a preservation project, I would look at preservation organizations like the New York State Archives, the New York State Library. Google is your friend. Grants for preserving old documents. But the library networks are really great resources for these, and they have contacts across the state, and they can they know about some of these grants as they're coming up. You just have to get on a couple of good mailing lists. Nyline, N-Y-L-I-N-E, is a good mailing list that sends out information about grants. And some of them are just really local. So talking to your local organizations, 3Rs organizations, or local government. The big ones, like I think somebody put candid.org, that's a great location, but sometimes they're national. So yeah, it's kind of hard to suss out, but just have to keep your ear to the ground. And even just, putting out a call onto a listserv saying, hey, does anybody know about any good grant organizations or grant opportunities for this type of project? People are really crowdsourced. That's a really good way to figure it out.
Nice. And then Mary has a question. So what are the points you would include in a quote unquote cold call request for funding letter.
I'm
That
not
sounds like
allowed to do that. I'm not.
So
Might get
I
in
can answer
trouble.
it. Yeah, I can answer it from like a public library aspect, or association libraries, I suppose, would be allowed to do this. And if you're asking for a funding letter, I would include a lot of the strategies that Melissa was talking about earlier today, where you want to make sure that you have a project, you have a sustainability plan, you show that this is something that's in high demand for what we're looking on. I wouldn't just blanket ask for money. I would try to tie it to something that you can do as an organization if you're looking for funding in that way. Christine came back, repeat the 2 types of grants that cannot be used together. Oh, I think this was in context with the construction aid program. It was New York State construction aid funds can't be used with SAM award money, which comes from legislators from time to time. Basically, you can't use, for construction, you can't use bonded money to match bonded money. And that's where those 2 sources of funding are. This is really specific to public libraries. So if you're working with this one, talk to your system. They should have somebody on staff that supports this type of information, or you can shoot me an email and I can see if I can help you out. And then Brenda asks, will the websites in the chat be emailed to us as well? I bet we can put Tina and Christy on that, and I bet they have all those. And there we go. Tina says we can. So that sounds great, and she'll be able to do that. We have a couple minutes left. So if anyone has any other lingering questions that they'd like to ask, go ahead and throw them in chat. And while people take the last few minutes to think about those, I'll have, oh, here we go. And a facilities plan template spreadsheet. Yeah, I have one of those. I'll send that to Christy and Tina, so you can use that, Christine, no problem. But
Laura had something she could add.
Oh yeah, there we go. Laura, go for it.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take over your session. I just a couple things occurred to me as I was listening to both of you. Really awesome stuff. But a couple things I would just throw in there. I think, Ron, in your spreadsheet, you mentioned something about partners. And one thing you'll often have the opportunity to do is provide a letter of support from a partner or, the organization you're working with. And this is overlooked a lot, at least in the grants that we receive. And I would think this might be the one exception where you could provide something that's unsolicited. Like providing a letter of support would probably strengthen your application. So that was just one thing I was thinking about. And then the other thing is just a little tip that I've used before. Since we're all so deep in our work, it's really hard to read your application as if you are someone who's not in your industry. So it is often we use a lot of acronyms and jargon, and you really need to fully explain everything that you're talking about in your application. So if you have a friend or family member who does not work in the industry and they would consider reading it and letting you know if there's anything that needs to be better explained, that's really helpful.
Nice, thanks, Laura. So Melissa, there was a question that had popped up in chat that I'll ask you. How are reviewers for the national grants chosen? NEH, IMLS, etc.
I have to be honest and say I honestly don't know, but I would imagine you could write to them and ask, I'm interested in being a grant reviewer. What are the qualifications? And they probably will let you know. I have never seen an open call for grant reviewers for those big grants. It's probably who you know.
I know for like local grants, and Melissa may operate differently where you're at, but usually when we have things that go out, we will try to use some of our trustees. But one thing that we always take a look back at is the conflict of interest forms that they fill out to make sure that they don't have any ties to the entities that are applying for those grants.
Right.
So that's part of the selection process that we go through. But you're absolutely right. Writing to them and asking is probably a really good idea to take on. And, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think if there's one takeaway, people should use the resources at their at the library networks, because or at the grant organizations. You know, people, they really truly want to give this money away. That's their job, and you know, they'd much rather you have a successful grant and spend time talking to you about it, than for you to put all of that time and effort into a grant and have it denied for some reason that could have easily been overcome. So don't feel like you're asking a stupid question. Don't feel like you're bothering people. You know, they will very, you know, they're very great about their time. I've been working with a woman at the Documentary Heritage Preservation Society of New York recently, Anastasia, and she has just been awesome, so helpful. And, you know, she'll say, I have this much time on this day, let's chat about it and let's follow up with that. So, you know, I just can't say enough about the people in those organizations and how helpful they've been.
This question that came in, this may be a question for our resource councils here. Can you share more about how to become a member of, I'm assuming that's Northern New York Resource Council?
Yeah,
Resource Network, sorry.
Looks kind of like that, yeah. I'm gonna point you to our member page, and there's a membership application you can take a peek at. There are certain stipulations that need to be in place, so you want to check that out and see if you fit. And if you have any questions, Meg Backus, our director here, is accessible and always available to answer those.
It's like filling out a grant application. Make sure you qualify.
All right. Okay, well, the last one that's in the Q&A section right now is just resources for grant sources, and it looks like we got a bunch of them in the chat. As Christy and Tina said, they will email them out afterwards. Yeah, Christy or Tina, any closeout information that we have?
No, but thank you so much for this. I learned a ton of stuff, and I think that all of the participants and the people who are going to view the recording will too. And yes, people are sharing some more resources, and you'll get an email, follow-up email with the link to the recording and the slides and the links to the templates that Ron provided, as well as we'll grab those links of resources from the chat and the Q&A. And if you have any questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out to whoever might be of assistance to you, whether it's your public library system or your network, your regional council or a state. But yeah, this was great. Thank you so much.
Thank
Melissa,
you very
it's
much
great
for
working
having
with
us.
you. Christy, Tina, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Laura, you too.
Yeah,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
It's your day. Take care.